When it comes to the book of Ruth, what's not to love? This bucolic 4-chapter book is placed where it would fit chronologically in the King James Version of the Scriptures, right after the bloody book of Judges. Nevertheless, it is generally accepted that the story of Ruth was written much later, in the 5th century BC, after the Jewish people returned to Israel following the Babylonian exile. That's about 700 years after the historical period in which it is set. In the Hebrew Bible, the book of Ruth is not grouped with the prophets, which are considered historical records, but rather in the third group of scripture, the Ketuvim, or writings, which are considered sacred literature rather than pure history. Poetic rhythm and structure is woven into its dialogue, its setting the pastoral fields between Bethlehem and Jerusalem. But what is most unusual about the book of Ruth is that it is a story of exceptionally good people we can learn from and seek to emulate. All the people in the book of Ruth are likable, gracious, thoughtful, and relatable. They are also recognizably human. This is more unusual than one might imagine. The beloved writer and scholar and Christian apologist C.S. Lewis observed that it was easier to write convincing portraits of seriously flawed characters than it was to write convincing good characters, because he said that when he wrote of flawed characters, he simply needed to think honestly of himself. But to write a thoughtful, multidimensional good character who isn't boring, flat, or a little goody two-shoes is harder, because oftentimes naturally good behaviors don't come naturally to most of us, even C.S. Lewis. And that is what is so wonderful about the characters in the book of Ruth. They are neither two-dimensional nor unlikable. However, they are almost all very good. They evoke what the runner Eric Liddell, as depicted in the movie Chariots of Fire, described as muscular Christians. Well, of course, Naomi, Ruth, Orpah, and Boaz, who supposedly lived in Israel 1,200 years before the birth of Jesus, were not actually Christians, but their demonstrations of pure devotion to God are robust, thoughtful, ingenious, caring, faithfully obedient to the religious practices and laws of the day, kind, self-sacrificing, and virtuous. One cannot help but like and admire each of these personalities. By the time we get to the 2nd chapter of the book of Ruth, the two widows, Ruth and her mother-in-law Naomi, have returned to Bethlehem, Judah, where Naomi and the late Elimelech originally lived before moving to the country of Moab to escape a famine. Naomi tried to convince her two bereaved daughters-in-law to return to their parents' homes and remarry after the untimely deaths of her sons, their husbands. One, Orpah, reluctantly obeys her mother-in-law. The other, however, will not hear of it. Before I continue with Ruth, a note about the two deceased sons of Elimelech and Naomi. Their names are Mahlon and Chilion. In Hebrew, these names mean sickness and wasting, respectively. This is one among other indications that the recorder of the book of Ruth was more a literary writer than an historical one. As Isaac Asimov observes, sickness and wasting don't seem to be the type of names anyone would give their children. By chapter 2, Ruth and Naomi have come to Naomi's old home near Bethlehem, but the two are in somewhat dire straits. Ruth suggests a solution and Naomi approves, sending her to the fields to glean. It is there that Boaz, the landowner, comes from Bethlehem and notices the young woman among his own crew. Boaz asks his foreman and is told that she's the widowed Moabite wife of his relative, Naomi's son. She has come back to Israel with her mother-in-law and asked permission to glean for their sustenance. Here, it is important to note that Moabites were not a respected group in Israel, but not only is there a sympathetic portrayal of this virtuous young foreigner from a generally despised group in this scripture, but she is its hero. What an important antidote to those who, after the Babylonian exile, strongly condemned any marriage with foreigners outside of the rigidly defined racial group. Truly, rebuking prejudice is an important theme of the entire book of Ruth. In this spirit, Boaz promptly praises the young widow who has left her land, as did Abraham and Moses, to come to Eretz Israel in support of her 3 times bereft mother-in-law. His gracious, generous reception to Ruth, giving her safety, protection, substance, and encouragement, is a model we all should embrace. Hurrying home to Naomi after a full day of fruitful labor, Ruth is eager to share her bounty and her stories. As she listens to the sage advice of her wise mother-in-law and faithfully follows it, Ruth's destiny unfolds. She will become a vital link in a chain of love that produces Israel's greatest kings. The book of Ruth is a portrait of a stranger in a strange land, but she brings with her habits of diligence, hard work, devotion, and humility, and finds honor through her virtues by those representing the established society. Ultimately, she will make an extraordinary contribution to hers, and all of our history. We enjoy her story as a sparkling pearl without price, as valuable today as it was over 2,500 years ago.